In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to work a crochet reinforcement and cut a steek. So I'm using the Galdor cardigan as an example, which is my own design. So we have, so far, this is the body. We've got a section of stitches down the center front. This is my marker for where the neck shaping starts. And then I've got another marker at the bottom to show where the center stitch is. And then we've got two armhole sections which are also going to be steeked. So you can see there's a little hole at the underarm there, and there's another one just at the top of the shoulder. And then this armhole, I've already worked the crochet reinforcement, so you can see how that looks. And I'm going to show you how that works. There are other methods for reinforcing a steek. You can sew them by hand or by machine. The crochet reinforcement is the one that I prefer, just because I find it gives a really sturdy edge. I've used a very slightly darker yarn just for this reinforcement. You can use the same colour yarn. I find that using a slightly different colour helps to just show which bits you've worked already, make things a bit clearer, and the yarn is going to be hidden on the inside of the garment anyway, so it doesn't really matter if you don't use the same colour yarn. Some people suggest using a smooth yarn that makes it easier to pull the stitches through when you're working the crochet. I prefer to use the same yarn I'm using for the body of the garment, because that provides a slightly stickier reinforcement, and I find that it feels like it's going to help the stitches stay in place better. So what we're going to do is, if I go to the unreinforced section here, now we've got our little hole at the bottom of the arm there, and then we've got the same at the top of the shoulder. This is where we've worked our shoulder seam, and so we're going to start up here. So a steek is worked over an odd number of stitches. So for this one we've got 5, sometimes you'll see 7 or even 9. Usually 5 is the minimum though, and these are just extra stitches that are worked when you knit that give space for reinforcing so that you can then cut where you need to. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, and we are going to be reinforcing either side of the center one. So I'm just going to put a little marker on that one just so you can see. So with my yarn, I'm going to be working from a ball of yarn, because unlike sewing, we are going to be crocheting, so we don't need to break off a section of yarn. So first I'm going to make a slip stitch, and I'm just going to put that on my crochet hook. You want to use a crochet hook that is slightly smaller than the needle that you were using to knit. I'm using a 1.5mm crochet hook because it happens to be one that I have, and it does work well with this yarn, which is fairly fine, but just a size or two smaller than the needle you're working with is great, and that'll just ensure a nice tight reinforcement. So we're going to go with the crochet hook through the middle of the stitch just to the right of the center stitch. And this is going to secure the working yarn to the bind off here. And so I'm going to pull the loop of yarn through from behind the bind off, and so now I've got 2 loops of yarn on there. And then I'm going to make another loop over the hook and pull that through both of them. Now that means that our yarn is secured right to the edge of that stitch. Now we're going to be working down a single row between the second stitch here and the center one. And so we're going to catch the left leg of the second stitch and the right leg of the center stitch. That will pull those stitches together and secure them so that they won't unravel when it's cut. Now it's easier to see sort of which stitch we're talking about if I hold it flat like this, but what I've actually found easier for crocheting, sorry, is if I fold it along the line that I'm going to be working. So if you can see there, I've got a row along the top of the fold, and that will mean that it's really easy to see which stitches I've already been through and which I need to work again. So I've just adjusted, so I've got my yarn over my finger, and we're going to go through the very next stitch down here. And we're going to go through those two legs, and as we did before, pull through a loop and then pull another loop through both of them. And then hopefully you can see there are little gaps showing between the rows, which makes it quite nice and clear where you need to make the next crochet stitch. And so we keep going through, just following that column of stitches down. Oops, I've split my yarn. That is one of the advantages of using a smoother yarn rather than a fairly loose one like this. And so you go through each stitch, well, technically through half of one stitch and half of the other stitch, and continue working down like this. And I will just skip ahead and show you what happens when we get to the bottom. So I'm just a few stitches away from the underarm bit here, so I'm just going to carry on working through those final stitches. And then this is the last one here. And then, oh, I've got to split my yarn there. And then if I move around there just so we can see where the hole is, as we did with the beginning, I'm just going to go through what is the cast on stitch here, pull a loop through, pull that through, break the yarn, and finish off. So now we have a nice line of reinforced stitches, which represents one side of the cut. So you can see there, that's just one side of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this 180 degrees round, and we're going to do exactly the same, starting where we've just finished off that first reinforcement. We're going to go through and we're going to make another slip knot with our yarn, put it over our hook, just arrange it so that we can reach the edge there nicely. So now, as we did at the beginning, we're just going to go right through the cast on of that stitch, pull our yarn through both loops on the hook, and then rearrange just so that we can work through those stitches nicely from side to side. And we're going to be going through immediately next to, it should be fairly obvious, it's this column of stitches here, and we're going to go through right next to where we've already worked. You can probably tell I don't do much crochet. And so we'll just carry on working along there exactly as we did for the first reinforcement, and then I'll also do the same, so both sets of reinforcements down the front of the cardigan, where again we have a marker marking the center stitch, and so we'll just be working either side of that. And then I will come back to you once we're ready to cut. We now have our 3 reinforcements, so one for each armhole and then one going down the front. So each set of reinforcement has between it a little ladder of stitches. So if you can see there, it's not super apparent, but there is a little line just where you have horizontal strands of yarn going between our 2 reinforced sections, and that is what we're going to cut. I'm using sharp little scissors. These give me more control. I'd recommend sharp ones. You can use larger sewing scissors. And at this stage we're just going to cut. So working right from the bottom here, just very carefully so that we don't cut the reinforcing yarn. You can go a couple of stitches at a time. I find that it helps to do that if you're a little bit nervous. But as you get used to it, you can move a little bit faster. Always making sure that you keep an eye on where your scissors are going. And at this stage the edge is well reinforced. You can see that we've just got our little blunt edges there, and that's not going anywhere. Our front steek done, so we can see that what was a slightly peculiarly shaped item now has a V-neck and 2 visible fronts. There's a gap in the front here, which is where we'll be picking up stitches for the neckband, and I'm just going to cut open the armholes, and then those will be ready for picking up the sleeves. We've got our little extra bits here, which is where we'll be picking up for the sleeves. We'll pick up some extra stitches underneath just to make sure that you don't have gaps. And at this stage is basically a nice little waistcoat, and that would work perfectly nicely as a sleeveless cardigan on its own. And so I hope that has made it seem a little bit less scary. I know that steeking can be a little bit terrifying, cutting into your knitting, but the crochet reinforcement is really strong, and once you have learned how to do it, it opens a lot of opportunities in your knitting. So I hope this has been helpful, and enjoy your knitting.